The first time I ever heard the name Lena Gray, it was spoken in a whisper, as though saying it too loudly might summon her from the shadows. I didn't believe the stories at first. How could I? Men who had served through years of blood and smoke, Navy SEALs who had fought in forgotten corners of the world, told the tale with the same half-smirk they used for urban legends. They said she wasn't real, that she was a myth built out of fear and awe, the kind of legend you tell rookies to keep them sharp. But then I saw her myself, and I understood why those men, hardened and nearly broken by war, lowered their voices when they spoke her name. We were at a training range deep in Virginia, the kind of place hidden from maps, where teams of the best honed skills they already mastered. It wasn't supposed to be unusual, just another drill, another evaluation where every second and every breath could be measured against perfection. But that day, standing in front of a squad of SEALs who thought they had seen it all, a woman with quiet eyes and no insignia walked onto the line. She was small compared to the rest of us, lean but not imposing, the kind of frame you would expect to blend into a crowd rather than dominate a battlefield. Nobody knew where she came from. Some thought CIA, others whispered Delta, and a few swore she was a ghost from some black file operation erased from official memory. The commander didn't introduce her, didn't even say her name. He just told us to watch, and when a man like that tells you to watch, you don't question it. She picked up the rifle like she was shaking hands with an old friend, no hesitation, no checking sights or fiddling with the stock, just a natural movement like it belonged to her more than it belonged to the army. The range went silent, not just because of respect, but because something about her presence demanded it. We had fired those drills 1,000 times, clearing rooms, stacking corners, switching to sidearms, always measured in seconds and fractions of seconds. It was muscle memory, instinct. But when Lena Gray lifted that weapon, time itself seemed to slow. She didn't rush. She didn't need to. One round fired. Just one. And every man on that range, SEALs who could hit moving targets in the dark, froze in disbelief. The target at the far end, a steel plate nobody had been able to chip at that distance without at least a few shots, cracked dead center, split almost perfectly in two, as though she had threaded a needle through metal. No follow-up. No correction. Just one clean pull of the trigger. Then she lowered the rifle and stepped back like she had done something ordinary. Nobody breathed. You could feel the shock ripple through the line, a wave that knocked every smug grin off the faces of men who had thought themselves untouchable. That was the first time I realized we weren't dealing with another operator, not even an elite one. Lena Gray wasn't just trained, she was something else, something beyond what any manual or school could shape. And the way the commander looked at her, not with pride but with a kind of careful distance, told me everything I needed to know. She didn't belong to us, not really. She belonged to whatever secret had built her, and we were only allowed a glimpse. Later, when the others tried to laugh it off, pretending it hadn't shaken them, I caught them glancing at the target, at the ruined steel, over and over again like they were checking to make sure it had actually happened. Men who had watched comrades die without blinking were rattled by a single shot from a woman whose history none of us knew. That's when the questions started, whispered between bunks, over coffee, behind closed doors. Who was she? Where did she come from? Why had she been sent to us, if she wasn't one of us? And why did she look at the battlefield like it was something she had already buried? I didn't have answers then. None of us did. All I knew was that her name, Lena Gray, wasn't a myth anymore. It was real, sharp as the crack of her rifle, and it carried the weight of something none of us were ready for. And though I didn't admit it out loud, a part of me wondered if her single shot that day was just a demonstration, or a warning. The second time I saw Lena Gray, it was no longer a demonstration on a clean training range but in the kind of scenario that pressed every nerve raw. The exercise was supposed to simulate an urban assault, a mock operation designed to stress test our ability to adapt under pressure. We'd been dropped into a fabricated town built by the Navy for training, concrete shells of buildings, alleyways rigged with tripwires, and hostile role-players who knew all our tricks. It was the sort of drill that could turn chaotic fast, and usually the chaos was the point. But when Lena appeared at the staging area, standing off to the side like a shadow that had wandered in, we all felt the energy shift. She wasn't carrying a rifle this time. Just a sidearm strapped low and a knife sheathed at her thigh, like that was all she needed. The commander didn't introduce her again. He didn't need to. Just the fact that she was there made every man on my team straighten a little tighter, breathe a little quieter. The mission clock started and we poured into the fake city. Dust rose from our boots, radios crackled, the air thick with the familiar rush of adrenaline. We cleared the first block, taking simulated fire from hidden shooters, responding with the controlled rhythm drilled into us through years of repetition. For a while it felt almost normal, until Lena moved. She wasn't in our stack, wasn't ordered into formation, but she slipped into the shadows alongside us like smoke curling under a door. The first hostile popped from a second-floor window, taking aim at one of our rear men. Before any of us could react, Lena's sidearm was up, one muted crack, and the hostile dropped his weapon with a startled yelp. It wasn't just the speed that shook me, it was the precision. She had aimed not at his chest or head, the obvious targets, but at the thin patch of exposed wrist between his sleeve and glove. The shot had numbed his hand instantly, forced him out of play without killing him in the simulation. No one I knew could hit that fast, that clean, on a moving target. The rest of the drill unraveled into chaos. Hostiles poured out from alleys, staged explosions shook walls, and our formation splintered under pressure. Normally that kind of breakdown leads to failure, but Lena was everywhere at once, moving through the dust and noise as though she had rehearsed it all 1,000 times in her head. She didn't bark commands, didn't try to take charge. She simply acted, and somehow the rest of us moved around her like gravity had shifted. When one of our men was cornered behind a burnt-out car, 3 hostiles pressing him from different angles, Lena didn't waste bullets. She slid low, knife flashing, tapping each enemy on the chest with surgical precision that signaled a kill in training terms, all before our teammate had time to blink. She didn't even look at him after saving his flank, just melted back into cover, eyes already searching for the next threat. I tried to keep track of her, but it was like trying to follow lightning. Every time I thought I'd lost sight of her, she reappeared where the fight was thickest, ending it before it could swallow us whole. By the time we reached the objective building, a squat 2-story. With barricaded windows, we were battered and running low on ammo. Normally, the final push would be a desperate gamble, but Lena stepped forward, calm, collected, like none of the chaos had touched her. She didn't wait for permission. She just went. One boot against the door, a sharp crack of wood, and she slipped inside before any of us could react. For a moment I thought she was reckless, that even her skill couldn't survive the numbers likely waiting in there. But then we followed, and what we found didn't feel like any drill I had ever run. The room was a maze of overturned furniture and simulated hostiles, but every one of them was already down, marked dead or disarmed. Lena stood in the center, her weapon lowered, her expression unreadable. It had taken her seconds. Just seconds to do what a full SEAL team was meant to do in minutes. And as we spread through the building, confirming the clear, the silence in our comms wasn't the usual discipline, it was disbelief. Nobody said it out loud, but we all felt it. She wasn't like us. She wasn't even close. She was something beyond, a predator built for a battlefield none of us could imagine. When the drill ended, the commander's voice came over the comms, steady but tinged with something I'd never heard before, respect laced with caution. Training complete. Return to base. No congratulations, no critique, just dismissal. And Lena? She walked out first, as if the entire exercise had been nothing more than a morning jog. The rest of us lingered, staring at the wreckage she had left in her wake. Later, when we stripped gear and sat in the debrief room, every man on my team avoided meeting each other's eyes. No one wanted to admit what we all knew, that for the first time, we had seen someone who made us question everything about our own skill, our own place in the hierarchy of warriors. That night, I lay awake in the barracks, the image of her still sharp in my mind. One part of me was awed, another unsettled. Who trains like that? Who fights like that in a simulation? It wasn't normal, it wasn't just experience. It was something more, something darker, like she had been sharpened on real battles the world wasn't allowed to know existed. And as much as I wanted to believe she was simply another soldier with unusual talent, a whisper in the back of my mind told me the truth. Lena Gray was no myth, no story. She was a secret given flesh, and for reasons I couldn't yet see, she had been dropped into our world like a stone into still water, sending ripples we couldn't control. That be why the third time Lena Gray crossed my path, the whisper of her name had already started to grow into something heavier among the teams. She wasn't assigned to us, not officially, but she appeared in places where we trained, where we fought simulations, where we thought we were alone. It was as if she were measuring us, not against each other, but against some invisible scale only she understood. Rumors spread faster than smoke. Some swore she was testing us for recruitment into a classified program, others thought she was planted to break us down, to remind us that no matter how sharp we believed ourselves to be, there was always someone sharper. I didn't want to believe the speculation, but a part of me couldn't shake the feeling that every time she looked at us, she wasn't seeing men, she was seeing data, calculating, dissecting, building a profile. That unsettled me more than her skill with a rifle. It was during a night exercise in the marshlands of North Carolina when the reality of who Lena might be began to take shape. We had been dropped into darkness, swamp water up to our knees, reeds tall enough to hide a squad of men. The objective was to infiltrate a mock enemy encampment, take down their communications, and exfiltrate without being detected. A challenge, but not impossible for us. The moon was hidden behind a heavy curtain of clouds, and the air was thick with mosquitoes and silence. We had rehearsed these kinds of ops dozens of times, yet that night, something felt different. She was with us again. No orders, no explanation, just there. She moved through the water like it wasn't there, every step measured, every sound swallowed by the night. It was unnatural. Even the most disciplined operators made some kind of noise in terrain like that, but not her. She might as well have been a shadow gliding between the reeds. Halfway to the target, the first complication hit. One of our men, a solid operator who never cracked under pressure, froze. His leg had sunk deep into the mire, a silent trap that clutched at him like quicksand. We couldn't make noise, couldn't risk alerting the perimeter guards ahead, and every second wasted put the mission at risk. I was about to signal the fallback when Lena appeared beside him. She didn't speak, didn't waste time. She crouched low, hands precise, and with one subtle motion freed his leg without so much as a ripple in the water. He looked at her like she had pulled him back from death, but she didn't meet his eyes. She simply vanished back into the reeds, her focus already fixed on the camp ahead. That was the moment I realized she wasn't here to help us, she was here because something about us was being observed. When we reached the encampment, the plan was simple: 2 teams, coordinated strikes, fast and silent. But Lena didn't wait for our signal. She broke off, moving toward the far side like she already knew the layout better than we did. I tried to track her through the darkness, but every time my eyes adjusted, she was gone again, swallowed by shadows. The first guard collapsed before we even breached the perimeter, a faint hiss of movement and then silence. The second dropped moments later, though none of us had seen her approach. It was unnerving, like watching death itself move ahead of us, clearing a path without sound or trace. By the time we breached the communications hut, Lena was already inside, standing over the enemy technician, who had raised his hands in surrender before we even had our rifles leveled. She had dismantled the radio equipment, neutralized every hostile, and cleared the building in less time than it took us to breach a single door. We exfiltrated as the night pressed down heavier, dragging the silence with us. No alarms, no pursuit, nothing but the whisper of water around our legs. Normally, a clean mission like that would leave us proud, confident. But that night, as we trudged back to the extraction point, the mood was heavier than any after-action I had ever felt. She had done everything we were supposed to do, faster and cleaner, without needing us. We weren't her team. We were just her audience. I caught the expressions on the faces of the men beside me, saw the tightening jaws, the frustration hidden behind their discipline. They weren't just shaken. They were afraid. Not of her, not exactly, but of what she represented. If Lena Gray existed, then everything we thought we were, the peak, the standard, the tip of the spear, was a lie. Later, back at base, there was no debrief with her. She had vanished before we even stripped gear, as though she had never been there. I asked the commander once, directly, who she was. He looked at me with the kind of steady stare men in his position used when they wanted to shut down questions without words. After a long silence, he simply said, "You don't need to know." That was the moment I understood. Whatever Lena Gray was, she wasn't ours. She wasn't SEAL, wasn't Army, wasn't CIA or any agency we could name. She was something deeper, buried under layers of clearance we would never touch. And yet, she had chosen to fire once in front of us, to move among us, to let us see her shadow. The question that gnawed at me wasn't what she could do. I had seen that with my own eyes. The question was why. Why had she stepped into our world at all? That night, lying awake again, the sound of water still clinging to my ears, I thought about the look on her face in the hut, standing over the technician. It wasn't anger, or pride, or even focus. It was detachment. Cold, sharp detachment, as if she were already somewhere else, her mind charting paths we couldn't follow. I wondered if Lena Gray even saw us as comrades, or if we were just pieces on a board she was moving toward some hidden goal. And as much as I tried to push the thought away, it kept returning, over and over. Maybe the real mission wasn't the one we were given. Maybe the mission was Lena herself. The fourth time I saw Lena Gray, the line between training and reality blurred so thin that I could no longer convince myself she was just a tool of demonstration. We had been sent on a joint exercise off the coast, an operation that involved live boarding of a vessel staged as hostile controlled. It was meant to be a simulation, but something about the orders felt heavier, the briefing tighter, the commander's eyes sharper than usual. We were told to expect resistance, but we all knew the role players and the rules. We had done these drills dozens of times. What we didn't expect was Lena stepping onto the deck of our transport just before we launched, her expression unreadable, her gear stripped down to essentials. She didn't wear our uniform, didn't patch herself into comms, didn't acknowledge us. She simply took a seat at the edge, eyes fixed on the dark horizon, as if she were already there, already inside whatever awaited us. The sea was restless that night, waves chopping hard against the hull as we approached the target. The vessel loomed like a black shape in the distance, lights cut, rocking in the swell. Standard drill procedure: approach quiet, board fast, secure the bridge, sweep below decks. But as we closed the gap, something was wrong. Too many shadows moved on that deck, too many figures standing guard where no guard should have been. My stomach tightened. This wasn't a drill. This was live. Whoever had orchestrated it hadn't told us, hadn't warned us, and the weight of that deception pressed heavy. Before any of us could voice it, Lena stood. She didn't speak, didn't gesture, but the way she checked her sidearm, adjusted the strap on her vest, told me everything I needed to know. She had known all along. The boarding itself was chaos. Grapples hit the rail, boots slammed onto steel, and the night exploded into shouts and gunfire. Real gunfire, not the blanks or controlled bursts of simulation. The first man to fall wasn't an enemy. It was one of ours, hit square in the shoulder, blood spraying as he crumpled. Training instincts screamed at us to check him, to pause, but reality didn't allow it. We pushed forward, hearts pounding, rifles barking into the dark. I tried to make sense of it, to understand how a training exercise had shifted into combat, but there was no room for questions, only survival. And through it all, Lena was ahead, her movements too fast, too precise, cutting through hostiles like they were made of paper. I will never forget the sight of her on that deck. She wasn't firing wild, wasn't spraying for effect. Every shot was exact, every strike deliberate. She moved like she had choreographed the fight in advance, like she knew where every enemy would be before they even appeared. I saw her disarm one man with a twist of his wrist, drop another with a single strike to the throat, then vanish into the smoke of a flashbang only to re-emerge seconds later, dragging one of our wounded to cover. She didn't hesitate. She didn't falter. She didn't bleed. And watching her, I realized something chilling. Lena Gray was not adapting to chaos. She was guiding it, shaping it, bending it around her until the battlefield itself obeyed. By the time we secured the bridge, half of us were shaken, 2 men injured, 1 critically. The exercise had turned into a bloodbath, and none of us had answers. The vessel was cleared, the hostiles bound, the air still thick with the smell of cordite and salt. My hands trembled as I reloaded, not from fear of the fight but from the realization of what had just happened. This hadn't been a mistake. We had been thrown into live combat without knowing it, and Lena had been the only one prepared. She stood at the helm, silent, scanning the dead and wounded with eyes that betrayed nothing. It was as though she had expected this outcome, as though the script had always been written for her. When we exfiltrated, the silence among my team was heavier than any debrief. No one spoke, not even whispers, as the transport cut back across the waves. The wounded were stabilized, the dead accounted for, and still no one asked the question burning in all our minds: who were those men, and why had we been sent against them? The commander offered no answers, only cold efficiency as he ordered medics and secured reports. Lena, as always, disappeared before we docked, vanishing into the shadows of the base like a phantom returning to wherever she belonged. But the image of her moving through that chaos stayed burned into me. It wasn't training. It wasn't luck. It was mastery of a kind I had never seen before, the kind that doesn't come from skill alone but from living in war so long it becomes part of your pulse. That night, none of us slept. We sat in silence, some cleaning rifles that didn't need cleaning, others staring at the floor, each lost in private thoughts. I found myself replaying every second, every glance, every move Lena had made. She hadn't just saved us. She had exposed us, shown us how unprepared we really were when stripped of the safety nets of protocol and control. And the more I thought about it, the more a single, unsettling truth settled into me. Lena Gray wasn't brought to us to prove her skill. She was brought to remind us of what we could never be. She was the answer to a question we hadn't dared to ask yet, a weapon shaped not by training, but by something deeper, something hidden. And the more I saw of her, the more I understood why men lowered their voices when they said her name. Weeks passed after the ship incident, yet Lena Gray's shadow never left us. Her presence had become a ghost in the barracks, haunting our thoughts even when she wasn't there. Men who once prided themselves on being unshakable began to second-guess themselves in drills, glancing at empty corners as if expecting her to materialize. I felt it too, the creeping weight of her silence. She didn't need to speak to command authority, the memory of her precision did that for her. I started noticing things in the way our commanders operated. Briefings that used to be straightforward grew tighter, coded, as if entire pages of context were being withheld. Missions we trained for bore layers of secrecy that no longer felt like exercises. And always, somehow, Lena was woven into them. Sometimes she appeared in the periphery, watching from a distance. Other times she was in the thick of it, moving beside us without ever really being part of us. The unease reached a peak one night when I caught sight of her in the hangar alone. She was cleaning a rifle, not unusual, but the way she did it, meticulous and almost ritualistic, felt different. I watched her from the shadows longer than I should have. She never looked up, never acknowledged me, but I knew she was aware I was there. It was impossible for her not to know. Finally, unable to hold back, I stepped forward and asked the question that had gnawed at me since the first time she fired a single round on the range. Who are you really? My voice sounded small in the cavernous space. She didn't stop her work, didn't even shift her posture. For a long time I thought she wouldn't answer at all. Then, without looking up, she said in a voice flat and calm, "You don't want that answer." That was all. She reassembled the rifle, stood, and walked past me, her footsteps echoing until they vanished. The words should have been dismissive, but they weren't. They were a warning. It was after that night the whispers started to twist darker. Some of the men began to speculate she wasn't human, not in the sense of science fiction, but in the sense of being beyond us, forged differently. Stories spread of secret government projects, of black sites where soldiers were broken down and rebuilt into something else. The kind of programs denied in daylight but funded in shadows. At first I laughed it off, but then I remembered the way she moved, the way she fought, the detachment in her eyes. It didn't feel impossible anymore. In fact, it felt terrifyingly close to the truth. And if that was true, then Lena Gray wasn't just a soldier. She was a weapon placed in our orbit for reasons we weren't meant to grasp. The next mission confirmed my fears. We were dispatched into the desert, flown under cover of night toward a target described only as high value. No names, no details, just a location in the middle of nowhere. By then we were used to the vagueness, but something in my gut told me this wasn't a drill. We hit the ground hard, sand whipping around us, the horizon endless and cruel. The target compound stood alone, a fortress of steel and concrete bristling with defenses. Normally, an op like that would take weeks of planning, surveillance, and logistics. We had been given only hours. And there she was again, Lena, standing at the front of the column like the desert belonged to her. She didn't wait for orders, didn't ask for approval. She simply moved, and like always, we followed, whether we wanted to or not. The compound was hell. Real bullets, real resistance, men dug in with skill and ferocity. We pushed through, sweating, bleeding, firing until our rifles were hot in our hands. And through it all, Lena was untouchable. I saw her take point against a fortified position, dropping hostiles with surgical precision, never missing, never hesitating. She moved in ways that felt impossible, anticipating ambushes before they sprung, cutting through defenses like she had memoized the place years ago. By the time we reached the inner chamber, my body was ragged with exhaustion, but she stood tall, untouched, as though the desert itself had bent to her will. Inside, we found what none of us expected. It wasn't a cache of weapons, wasn't a hidden commander. It was files. Stacks of drives, documents, sealed crates marked with symbols I had never seen before. We didn't have time to process it, but as our commander barked orders to secure the intel, I caught Lena standing apart, staring at one of the crates with an intensity that chilled me. Her hand hovered near it for a moment, not touching, just close enough to feel its presence. Then she turned and walked away without a word. I didn't understand it then, but I knew whatever was in those crates was tied to her. It wasn't speculation anymore. She wasn't here by accident. She was connected to the very things we were fighting to uncover. When we returned, exhausted and silent, the crates vanished into classified storage, locked away where we would never see them again. No explanation was given, no recognition, no clarity. Just silence. And Lena? She disappeared as always, vanishing into the folds of secrecy that wrapped tighter around her every time. But I couldn't shake the look in her eyes back at that compound. For the first time since I'd met her, she looked less like a machine and more like someone standing on the edge of remembering something they weren't supposed to. And that scared me more than anything else. Because if Lena Gray could feel, if she could remember, then whatever truth she carried wasn't just a weapon. It was a secret that could shatter everything we thought we knew. After the desert operation, I couldn't let go of the image of Lena staring at those crates. The way her hand had hovered near them wasn't casual. It was recognition. Something in her knew what was inside, and that terrified me more than the gunfire or the blood we had spilled. In the days that followed, I searched for scraps of information, anything that might explain who she really was. Of course, everything official was locked beyond my clearance, and asking the wrong questions was a quick way to earn suspicion. Still, I pushed where I could, overheard conversations, loose talk from intel officers, hints buried in after-action reports. What I found wasn't much, but it was enough to keep me awake at night. Buried in the margins of a transfer log, I saw a code name linked to the operation, Project Spectre. No unit, no branch, just that. And when I tried to dig deeper, the system locked me out, flashing warnings I had never seen before. That was when I knew. Lena Gray wasn't just someone extraordinary. She was the result of something hidden, something built, and whatever Project Spectre was, it was stamped across her soul. I should have stopped there. A smart man would have. But I couldn't. The more I thought about her, the more I felt like a moth circling a flame I knew would burn me. So when the next mission came, I paid attention to every detail, every moment that might crack the mystery open. We were deployed into mountainous terrain this time, tasked with intercepting a convoy moving through winding passes. The official story was that it was another exercise, but none of us believed that anymore. Too much had gone real, too many simulations had ended with real blood spilled. By then, the team no longer spoke of Lena as if she were one of us. She wasn't. She was something above us, beyond us, and we were just the witnesses left in her wake. The convoy appeared at dawn, a string of armored vehicles kicking up dust along the narrow road. We set the ambush with precision, explosives planted, rifles ready, the kind of preparation we could do in our sleep. But before we could spring the trap, Lena moved. She didn't wait for the signal, didn't even check with command. She slid down the rocky slope, disappearing into the rising light like she was made of it. I watched through my scope as she approached the lead vehicle, moving with impossible grace, slipping between sight lines like she had studied the driver's every glance. Then she was on them, a blur of motion, disabling the first guard with a strike so fast I barely saw it, planting something under the vehicle, then vanishing again before anyone noticed. Seconds later, the explosion rocked the canyon, flipping the lead truck and blocking the path. Chaos erupted, gunfire splitting the air, shouts echoing off stone. We opened fire, but my eyes stayed fixed on her. Lena moved through that convoy like a phantom, darting between vehicles, shots ringing out only when absolutely necessary. She disarmed enemies faster than we could target them, pulled drivers from cabs, dragged wounded away from flames, all while never once hesitating. I saw a man aim at her from behind, his rifle raised, and before I could even call it out, she turned and fired. One round, sent a mass. He fell, eyes wide, as if he couldn't comprehend how she had known he was there. It wasn't training. It wasn't instinct. It was something deeper, something unnatural. She wasn't reacting. She was anticipating, moving through the fight like she had already lived it once before. When it was over, the canyon was silent except for the crackle of fire and the groans of the captured. Our explosives had blocked the path, our rifles had thinned the ranks, but the truth was plain, Lena had won the battle. Without her, we might have been overrun, pinned down, shredded in that narrow kill zone. With her, it had been surgical. But as we secured the prisoners, I noticed something strange. One of the men she had taken down wasn't dead. He lay on the ground, clutching his side, blood pooling under him. And as the medics rushed past, I caught him whispering a name under his breath. Not hers. A different one. A name that made my stomach turn. He said, Spectre. Over and over, like it was a prayer, or a curse. That night, back at base, I couldn't shake it. He hadn't said her name. He had said the code name I had seen in the logs. Spectre. And when I looked at Lena across the hangar, standing alone as always, I felt the truth settle heavy in my chest. That wasn't just her project. That was her. Lena Gray wasn't her real name. It was a mask, a cover. Beneath it, she was Spectre, the living embodiment of whatever program had forged her in silence. And if the enemy knew that name, if they recognized her on sight, then she wasn't just our weapon. She was theirs once too. I wanted to confront her, to demand answers, but when I approached, she gave me a look that froze me in place. Not anger. Not threat. Just warning. A warning sharper than any blade. "Walk away," her eyes said, though her lips never moved. And in that moment, I understood what she had meant back in the hangar when she told me I didn't want the answer. Because the answer wasn't just about her. It was about all of us, about the wars we thought we fought in daylight while darker ones raged in the shadows. And Lena Gray, or Spectre, stood at the center of it. Sleep became impossible after that mission. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the prisoner's mouth moving, shaping that name with his last breaths, Spectre. I saw Lena's silhouette against the firelight, her movements too precise, too knowing, as if the battlefield was only a stage and she had memorized the script. The rest of the unit tried to brush it off, but I noticed how their conversations shifted whenever she walked into the room. They admired her, feared her, relied on her, yet deep down they understood she wasn't one of us. She was something else, an answer to a question nobody dared ask. And I, against my own survival instincts, couldn't stop chasing the truth she carried like a shadow stitched to her every step. The chance came one evening during a rare lull, when the desert winds howled against the hangar walls and most of the team was either passed out or busy with maintenance. I found her outside near the perimeter, sitting on a crate, her rifle leaned against the fence. For the first time, she looked less like a machine and more like a woman carrying too many ghosts. I sat beside her without asking. For a long while, neither of us spoke. Then I whispered the word, "Spectre." Her shoulders stiffened, and I thought for a second she might put a bullet in me right there. But she didn't. Instead, she sighed, a sound heavier than I'd ever heard from her, and finally said, "So you know." It wasn't a question. It was a confession wrapped in resignation. She didn't look at me as she spoke, her eyes fixed on the endless stretch of desert, but her words carved into me with a clarity I'll never forget. Spectre wasn't a code name for an operation. It was a designation for people. For assets. For me. I asked her what that meant, and she told me enough to unravel everything I thought I knew about the wars we fought. Years ago, long before she was assigned to us, she had been part of a classified program, something buried so deep it didn't exist on paper. Children selected for aptitude, stripped of their identities, and trained from the ground up not just as soldiers but as weapons tuned to the battlefield. She had been one of the few to survive the process, molded into something sharper, faster, colder. They didn't call her Lena Gray back then. They called her Spectre, because she moved through combat like a ghost, unseen until it was too late. Listening to her was like being pulled into a nightmare that explained too much. Her unnatural instincts, the way she anticipated danger, her ability to fight like she was rewinding reality itself. It wasn't luck, it wasn't experience, it was programming etched into her bones. I asked how she escaped, and she laughed bitterly. "You don't escape something like that. You're released when you're useful somewhere else." She told me she had been traded between programs, reassigned when the unit she was built for collapsed under scandal. The brass gave her a new name, a new file, and buried her history under clearance levels none of us could touch. By the time she reached us, Lena Gray was just another soldier on paper. But the truth was that Spectre never died. She just wore a mask that fit the mission. I wanted to hate the people who had done that to her, to rage at the machine that had turned a child into a ghost. But all I felt was cold fear, because if they had made her, then how many others had they made? How many were still out there, wearing new names, playing roles in battles we thought we understood? I asked her that, and she finally turned to look at me, her eyes sharper than the desert stars. "Too many," she said. That was when I realized the truth. Lena hadn't been placed with us by accident. She was watching us as much as we were watching her. The more she spoke, the more it felt like I was trespassing into knowledge that could get me killed. She warned me not to repeat a word of it, not even to the team. "You don't know who's listening. You don't know who's waiting for someone to say the wrong thing." When I pressed her on why she was telling me at all, she said something I'll never forget. "Because you looked at me and saw a person, not just a weapon. Nobody else here does." Those words dug into me, left me torn between admiration and dread. She was trusting me with the kind of truth that erased people, and yet I couldn't walk away. Not anymore. That night changed everything. From then on, every mission we went on wasn't just a battle against the enemy, it was a test, a puzzle, an attempt to understand the line between Lena Gray and Spectre. And though she tried to keep her distance, I noticed how she lingered near me more, how her eyes searched mine in quiet moments as if she was asking whether I would keep her secret. I did. Not out of loyalty to command, but out of something deeper. Maybe fear. Maybe fascination. Maybe both. But as weeks passed, I knew one thing for certain: Spectre's story wasn't over. It was only just beginning, and being near her meant I Was already tangled in it whether I wanted to be or not. The last mission with Lena began under a sky that felt wrong, the kind of heavy darkness that pressed down on your chest and warned you before the first shot was fired. We were tasked with intercepting a convoy believed to be transporting stolen tech, but the details were thin, too thin, and every instinct in me screamed that this was a setup. The unit moved with precision, silent signals, breaths measured, hearts locked in rhythm, but my eyes were on her. Lena, Spectre, wasn't tense like the rest of us, she was calm, almost too calm, as if she already knew what was waiting. The ambush came not from the convoy but from the ridges above. Gunfire ripped through the silence, tracer rounds carving the night, and we scrambled for cover. I shouted orders, returning fire, but in the chaos, Lena broke formation, sprinting across open ground like she was untouchable. For a moment, it looked suicidal, but then I saw what she was doing, drawing the enemy's focus, pulling their line of sight, cutting an opening for us to regroup. It worked. We pushed forward, neutralized half their positions, but the fight wasn't over. That was when everything shifted. From the shadows emerged figures that weren't local militia, weren't random hostiles. They moved like Lena, precise, deadly, trained beyond normal soldiers. My blood ran cold as I realized what I was seeing, others like her. Spectres. They came at us with a coordination that stripped away our advantage, and for the first time, the SEAL unit, the best of the best, felt like prey. Lena met them head-on, her body flowing with lethal efficiency, her strikes too fast to track. One moment she dropped an attacker with a blade, the next she had disarmed a rifle and turned it on another. But as I fired, as I fought, my eyes never left her. This wasn't just combat, it was recognition. They knew her. They weren't trying to kill her. They were trying to take her back. The battle stretched into a blur of smoke, muzzle flashes, and screams swallowed by the night. When the last enemy fell, silence returned like a hammer, broken only by the ringing in my ears. We had lost 2 men, 3 more were bleeding, and yet my focus was locked on Lena standing over a fallen Spectre, her knife dripping under the dim moonlight. She was breathing hard, but her face was unreadable, a mask carved from stone. I walked up to her, weapon lowered, and asked the question I'd been carrying since the desert, "What are you?" She didn't flinch. She didn't lie. "I am what they made me," she said softly, "and what they'll never stop trying to reclaim." Around us, the unit stared, their disbelief thick in the air. They had seen it too, her fight against shadows of herself, and nothing I could say would erase what was burned into their memories. Command demanded answers, but Lena refused debriefing. When pressed, she only gave operational details, never touching the truth we had witnessed. I expected brass to dig deeper, to uncover her past, but instead they shuffled reports, buried inconsistencies, and ordered silence. That was when I realized she was more valuable to them as a myth than as a soldier. They knew. They had always known. Her placement with us wasn't oversight, it was insurance, a way to keep Spectre close but not too close, monitored without a leash. The men whispered now when she entered a room, not in mockery but in awe, in fear, as if she was a living weapon that might explode at any moment. Yet despite it all, she stayed, completing missions, fighting alongside us, carrying the weight of her past like armor no bullet could pierce. The final night I saw her, we were back stateside, the war a continent away but never truly gone. She found me in the hangar, the same place where the truth had once slipped between us, and handed me a sealed envelope. "If something happens to me," she said, "burn this before anyone else can touch it." I asked what was inside, and she gave me a look that froze me to the bone. Answers you don't want, but might need. I took it, but before I could ask more, she was gone, disappearing into the shadows as easily as stepping off a stage. That was Lena Gray. That was Spectre. Always leaving before you could catch her, always one step ahead of the questions that could tear the world open. Weeks later, during a mission I wasn't cleared to know about, Lena Gray vanished. No body, no trace, just a single transmission intercepted on a secure channel. A voice, distorted, calm, unmistakable. Her voice. 2 words only, "Still free." Command declared her MIA, the unit was told to move on, but none of us could. Because we knew the truth. She wasn't missing. She was out there, somewhere between ghost and legend, hunted by the same shadows that had created her, refusing to be claimed again. And me, I kept the envelope hidden, sealed, untouched, because part of me feared that opening it would mean stepping into her world, and once inside, there would be no way back. Even now, years later, her memory is stitched into every operation I run, every silence before a firefight, every instinct that whispers when danger is near. Lena Gray, or specter, wasn't just a soldier, wasn't just a weapon. She was the question we were never meant to ask, the secret hidden behind the wars we thought we understood. She fired once and left a SEAL unit speechless, but the real silence was what followed, the realization that the battlefield isn't shaped only by men and machines, but by ghosts trained to walk among us. And somewhere out there, in a world too blind to see her shadow, Lena Gray is still moving, still watching, still free. The end.